Tonight on Masterpiece, Alan Ayckbourn, one of Britain's most popular playwrights, discusses the secrets of his trade. This week's program comes from the University of Wales at Cardiff, where recently Ayckbourn conducted a public workshop called The Plain Man's Guide to Playmaking. Hello, Alan Ayckbourn has written nearly 50 plays, including Absent Friends, Absurd Person Singular and The Norman Conquests. He's known for bringing a comic eye to bear on middle-class life, as well as for intricate plots and revealing dialogue. In fact, he's also a director, and just recently directed the London production of 2 Weeks with the Queen, a play written by the Australian writer Maurice Gleitzman. Alan Ayckbourn is usually reluctant to talk in detail about his writing, but recently he devised this workshop while he was visiting Professor of Drama at Oxford and has performed it only a handful of times to very small audiences. Tonight we get to see this light-hearted demonstration of making theatre, beginning with the use of dialogue. Alan Ayckbourn's Plain Man's Guide to Playmaking.
It's a little-known fact, but I'll let you into a secret. 75% of this country are at present about to start, are halfway through, or in the act of finishing a play. I know this because they all send them to me. The other 24% actually do have very good ideas for plays, but haven't got around to writing them, and they send those to me as well. This is for all of you, plus the 1% who have no interest in writing plays at all. God bless you particularly. A plain guide to playmaking. Dialogue. Dialogue, well, yes, it's a couple of people talking to each other, really. It's more than that, obviously. It's a very careful selection of words. Modern dialogue, a lot of which is naturalistic, realistic dialogue, certainly the sort I normally tend to write, is artfully simple. I learnt at the feet of Harold Pinter, whose dialogue doesn't really resemble mine, but I was fascinated by the way he, as a natural poet, used words very carefully in sentences. Quite often, unless you examined them, which I did when I was acting, when one had to learn them, you tend to examine lines rather more carefully, how very selective he was in his use, and in particular his repetition of words. And I became very fascinated by the use of dialogue, the use of almost real dialogue, although an actor flatteringly once said to me that when they mislearned a line of mine, they got the wrong word, the wrong rhythm on it, it became impossible to say. And there are natural rhythms to good dialogue, which I hope I write, which allow people to make the point. But beyond the dialogue, of course, there are things such as subtext lurking. Characters often speak, certainly in dialogue in my plays, without a sense of knowing what they're really saying. They're saying one thing and something quite different is in fact being spoken to the audience silently and almost by implication. And of course the other great quality that surrounds dialogue, the pauses, but pauses are only as good as the dialogue that surrounds them. We're very, very fortunate in England of having a completely illogical nonsense language that means nothing actually means what it says, or if it does, it means 7 other things as well. Which is absolute hell, I'm sure, for lawyers, but absolute heaven for playwrights. I once said it was a language in which you could be insulted 24 times while talking to someone and not realize it until you'd walked away. I'll try and give you a few examples of dialogue tonight and the way I use it. These are mythical strands of dialogue invented specifically for this moment, although I hope they will give you some insights. A lot of it is very obvious, but then the best things, I think, are obvious, but some of them need to be spoken, and when they are, one suddenly realizes that that's what you've been doing all along, but it's rather nice to know you were. Prose, which is a completely different form of writing, tends to, certainly for playwrights, be an absolute bother. I spend as long writing a program introduction note for a program than I do to writing the play itself. I have great trouble writing well-constructed sentences, and all my English lessons, prepositions and grammar and construction and verbs and transients and things come hurtling back to me, all of which is lost when I write dialogue, where very rarely do you finish a sentence, very rarely do you bother with where the verb goes or the noun, and most of the sentences we speak in normal speech probably don't even have a verb in them. But here's a piece of slightly banal, but nonetheless bald prose, and I'll show you how one writes it first as prose, and then perhaps how we translate it into dialogue and the difference that happens when you do. So, a bit of prose.
As Tony spoke, Mary cast her mind back to that distant day when she had entered the school 1,500 meters and been lapped 3 times by Elizabeth Burnett.
Not awfully exciting, but there it is. It's a statement, the sort of thing that, given one's dramatic skills, you can begin to enlarge, given 2 characters following that same piece of information through, one can begin to say an awful lot more from those few fragmentary lines. Here's the piece which I've set as a piece of simple dialogue.
I feel the same being with you as I did when I ran in the school 1,500 meters.
Am I that hard to keep up with?
No, it's not just that.
What then? What?
Elizabeth Burnett, she was the school champion, built like a gazelle. She lapped me 3 times. 3 times, would you believe? The race was over, but they made me keep running on my own for 2 whole laps. While the rest of the school cheered and jeered.
How awful. What made you think of that now?
I can't imagine, Tony. I really can't.
Starting a play is second only to trying to finish it in difficulty. There is the dramatic way to start it, which might sound something like this.
My God, I think I've killed her.
Which is okay. But it does leave you with an awful lot to follow, really. Unless you're writing about a serial killer, it really, really can get a bit monotonous by Act 2. So you could opt, and this is something that our cousins across the Atlantic are very fond of, lulling the audience in by the form of a narrator.
Hello there. Welcome to Rainbowville. Imagine, if you can, a small town. Some people might call it an insignificant town, somewhere on a winding road to nowhere. Nonetheless, a homely town, a familiar town. A town not unlike 1,000 other towns, a place where people somehow manage to be born, live, love, associate, congregate, celebrate, altercate, fornicate, and procreate, and one day at the end of it all, disintegrate. And pass on to somewhere bigger. And in between, well, I suppose that for most of them it's taken up trying to live their lives as best they can.
Good morning, Jim.
There's one of them now.
There are traps with narrators. The poet in the writer can be lured out where he should have been kept securely nailed in a box. And one begins to get rather lyrical, God help us. But it can get the show moving. The other start is to intrigue audiences to the extent where they lean in. This can be done with what I call the mysterious brackets pretentious start. Very popular on the continent and translated by someone you've never heard of. It might sound a bit like this.
My name is name. And yet name is not my name. For to name me is to call me by name, and who knows what a name becomes once it is called, once it is named. Name no names, I beg you. Name me, not name. Never call me names lest you call me by name, for once I am named, I am named no more. But nameless, nameless, nameless.
You hear the seats slamming up in Huddersfield. I thought you told me this was a comedy. There is a happy medium. It takes a bit longer, but it's something. Well, the thing to do. I mean, well, probably we're over frenetic in the theatre, but certainly less so than our cousins in television. But it's very important to get people's interest very quickly before they've had time really to decide that they didn't like the look of the set. So one tries to get something going as fast as possible. That's the ideal, even if it's just a little question mark that says, well, I'll see how this resolves before I leave. This is what I call the happy medium. In a few lines, I hope we begin to create at least some sort of mystery.
Hello?
Hello?
I'm home.
Who's home?
Me.
Who's me?
Me. Hello.
Who are you?
What do you mean, who am I? I'm Donald.
Well, Donald. Donald who?
Donald who? Donald. Donald. Don't be so damn stupid, Caroline. Donald, your husband, Donald. That Donald.
You're not my husband.
What?
I've never seen you before in my life. Get out.
Well, you get curious anyway, don't you? Just as important as how to start, there's the other possibility of when to start. The narrative, if you follow me, is a line. It's very important to start far enough into the story that it gets moving, as is indicated, as quickly as possible. Starting too early can result in one set of disasters, and starting too late can result in another. There is the optimum time when you actually can safely start your narrative in the knowledge that the audience can still keep it up, still keep up with it, and it can still drive forward. If not, if you start too early, this sort of thing tends to happen.
Come in, Donald. I wasn't expecting you. Sit down. You look terrible. What on earth is the matter?
Delia, something simply dreadful's happened. Caroline's left me.
Has she?
Walked out, just left, like that. Not a word, not a hint, just left me.
Oh, dear. Tell me all about it.
I will. It's terrible, Delia. It's just terrible. Sit down. Let me tell you all about it. It's a long, long story, but I'll try and keep it as brief as I can.
Go on. I'm listening.
Well, here goes. About 10 years ago...
Listen, 9 years too early, that one. Fatal. But, on the other hand, go to the other extreme and start too late, and you get this confusion.
Hello, is that Joanna? Hello, Joanna, it's Delia. The most terrible things happened. Caroline's finally left Donald. Yes. Yes, well, that's exactly what I thought. No. Anyway, she's upstairs in floods of tears when she's not rushing in and out of the bathroom. And then listen, this is the worst bit. Who should turn up in the middle of all this but Donald himself? Yes, in person, looking for a shoulder to cry on. My dear, I had no idea what to do. I just sat there while he burbled out the whole story, simply praying that Caroline wouldn't suddenly waltz downstairs. As it was, I heard her clumping about. I told him it was Geoffrey, home early. I don't think he believed me for a minute. In fact, it all got rather complicated after that.
You get the feeling you've missed the first act, don't you? It's a great art in theatre, if you can do it, to give the people the impression that they've very fortunately arrived at just the right time and are sitting in just the right location to see just the right sequence of events. And thus you keep your repeats off stage. If a character comes on who hasn't heard the news, get them off and do the bit there. Sometimes people get it completely the reverse thing, and all the most interesting stuff seems to happen some 100 yards away in the wings, when all the boring bits are happening here. And you get lines like, wow, that was a great party, and we're going to have fun in a minute, and you shout more than we are. So somehow or other, you have to bring all that information in front of them, what I call now action, action that actually happens while you are present. If you're crafty, it doesn't look as if you've rigged it that way either. People just go out at the end of the evening saying, maybe in their minds, I was very lucky to be where I was tonight to see it, because I got all the best events. It's a careful editing of history. Here's an attempt, and it takes longer because you often have to go a little bit more around the houses, but it's much more satisfying, I think you'll find, if you can start your story with the events unrolling in front of our very eyes for the first time for all of us, and not being informed by a character who's witnessed them some hours earlier. Here's those same events actually happening now.
And that's the whole dismal story, Delia, in a nutshell.
And you had no idea at all that Caroline was planning to leave you?
Not an inkling. I came home, same as usual. I poured myself a drink. Dinner was on the table. I sat down. I got stuck into the egg mayonnaise. I was halfway through the first course before I realized she wasn't sitting opposite me.
Oh, dear.
I can't understand it, Delia. After 10 years, why on earth should she want to leave me?
I couldn't begin to hazard a guess, Donald.
Oh, there we are, then. And that's her best friend said. What's that?
What?
Upstairs. There's somebody walking about upstairs.
Is there?
Yes, there. There, listen.
Oh, yes. It's only Jeff.
Jeff.
Yes.
You mean your husband, Jeff?
Well, of course my husband, Jeff. Who else would I be talking about? Jeff, Jeffrey. No one else would be walking around in our bedroom called Jeff, would they?
No, quite. He's wearing shoes.
Yes. So?
Women's shoes, they sound like it.
Do they?
Yes, listen. High-heeled things, surely. They sound like it to me. Don't they to you?
Yes. Well, thereby hangs a tale.
Good Lord. Do you mean... Good Lord. He's... Oh, heavens, Jeffrey. Oh, you poor thing.
Yes, well, I'd rather not talk about it, Donald, if you don't mind.
No, but you have to, Delia. You need to. These things need to be talked about. They do. You have to talk. Now.
Oh, do I really?
One of the important parts of dialogue is obviously to convey information. And most of the early part of most plays is about trying to fill you in on the universe, the world, the characters that the playwright is trying to involve you in. And there are ways to do it. It can read a bit like a sort of a railway train timetable if you're not careful of information. There is also the fatal trap, which this is only slightly exaggerated, but this section I've called I Don't Know Why I'm Telling You All This. It's where characters who've known each other for years proceed to tell each other about each other, palpably for our benefit, and unless they belong to some celebrated memory loss society, one can't think of another reason. But one does quite often in plays, quite seriously, meet sections not unlike this.
Do you realize that we've been married for 10 years, Caroline and I?
I was her bridesmaid, remember?
Oh, dear, of course, I was forgetting. You've been her best friend for ages, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Ever since school.
Funny, that. It's odd, you being Caroline's best friend and me being David's.
Yes. And then I married David.
And I married Caroline.
Funny.
Yeah. I was David's best man, of course.
You're forgetting. I was there.
Oh, of course. And that must have been, what, 9 years ago?
9 years. Next November.
Guy Fawkes night. You were married on Guy Fawkes night, weren't you?
Yes, so we were.
Surprise. Perhaps the subtler way to drop it in, and it does, again, take a little longer, but it's a lot more satisfying. And if you'll notice in this next chunk just how much information one does manage to throw in without necessarily having to hammer it at us. Yes, they are saying the same things as they said there, but they're saying them much more obliquely. And actually, in the time spent, we learn even more about them. This is the oblique art, I hope, of conveying information through dialogue, a little bit more unforced.
Do you realize I've devoted 10 years of my life to that woman? I gave Caroline everything. Everything a wife could want.
Maybe you didn't, you know, Donald. Maybe you just thought you did.
Now, what are you saying?
I mean that sometimes men believe they're giving their wives everything they want, when in reality the woman may be looking for something utterly different.
Well, like what, for instance?
I don't know.
You're her so-called best friend. You tell me. What is it she hasn't got, eh? She's got a damn great house, 2 cars, 3 kids, dogs, cats, budgerigars, God knows what. Bloody great summer house. What else does the woman want?
There are other things, Donald. If you don't realize that, you'll just have to take my word.
What? What?
I don't know. Why don't you ask her? If she ever comes back. Ask Caroline. We're not all identical, Donald. We don't all want the same things. We don't all react the same way, you know? I do appreciate that it's a popular male misconception that we do. All women want this, all women do that. But believe me, it really is fatal to generalize. Exactly as it is with men. I've known Caroline for 20 years. We grew up together. We went to school together. We shared a flat. I was a wretched bridesmaid, for God's sake. But I couldn't begin to tell you what it is she really and truly wants from men. How could I?
Does David give you what you want?
Not really, no. 9 years on, he's still none the wiser. Blundering about, buying me football boots for Christmas.
Football boots?
Metaphorically.
Ah.
But I'd rather not talk about our marriage, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
Let's just say it's rather an irony that we should have to celebrate our wedding anniversary every year on Guy Fawkes night. It was rather a fun idea at the time, marrying then. What started as a rocket has slowly but surely turned into a squib.
Oh, Delia, I had no idea. I'm sorry.
Oh, hadn't you? I rather thought you and David would have discussed it. The 15th hole, over a pint.
No, we don't do that sort of thing.
Best man, best friend, best buddies.
For God's sake, there are some things men just don't discuss, Delia. Give us credit for a certain amount of loyalty.
I know quite a bit about you.
You do?
Oh, yes.
From Caroline?
Yes.
What?
All sorts of things. You'd be surprised.
Oh, Lord.
Quite a lot of information, I think fairly unforcedly pushed through. The other function of dialogue, of course, is to illuminate character. A lot, an awful lot, is down to the actor. But I always have a stab when I'm writing a play to try and identify a character very strongly by their speech patterns. I always like to feel that if an actor were to put their hand over the column of characters' names on the left-hand side of the page, they would be able to identify their character by the pattern of their speech, if they had a speech of more than a couple of words. And it's a sort of ideal to strive for. People do speak differently, in short sentences, in long, convoluted sentences, and so on. And some have little speech tricks, which it's nice to identify. You can make them like a whole room full of people with tics if you're not careful, but they can all have quite often, you can use dialogue to underpin the underlying emotion of the character. It's quite interesting to note, for instance, in passing, that people of authority, people who are of great self-importance quite often, or at least, yes, people of high rank, very often can speak slowly, casually, and pause in their speech, very confident that no one dare interrupt them for risk of being fired. It is the minions of this world, the rest of us really, who speak in short, sharp sentences, desperately trying to get a word in before the big man starts to speak again. Here's an example of a little lady trying to make her point, and suddenly finding for the first time in her life that she has more than 2 seconds in which to say it.
You're her best friend, apparently, Delia, so I'm constantly being told. Exactly what is it she's lacking?
There are other things, Donald, you know. There are, honestly. If you don't realise that, you'll just have to take my word. You will, really.
What? What?
I tell you, I don't know. Really, I don't. Well, you'll have to ask her, won't you? Ask Caroline. Why don't you ask her? If she ever comes back. I'm sorry, but the truth is we're not all identical, you see, Donald. Women. We don't all want the same things, you see. We don't all react the same way, you know. I mean, I know men often think we do. You know, all women do this, all women want that. But believe me, we don't, you see, Donald. Honestly, we don't. And it really is fatal to generalize. It really is, Donald. It's no different than it is with men, you see. I've known Caroline for 20 years. I must have done. We grew up together, we went to school together, we shared a flat. I was her bridesmaid, wasn't I? But I couldn't honestly begin to tell you at all what it is she really and truly wants from men, Donald. How could I possibly? Really? Honestly? I'm sorry. Sorry.
Have you quite finished, Delia?
Are we onto the arena of the long speech? How a speech is written on a page can have quite an effect on an actor. I used to, in the early days, try and avoid presenting actors with long speeches. They sort of mentally take a huge deep breath and thus signal to the audience that you're stuck with me for the next 10 minutes, everybody. Usually most actors are rather apologetic about that. The ones that aren't are the ones I don't like working with anyway. But occasionally you are stuck with a long speech. Now, long speeches for me are the exception rather than the rule in our normal lives. People aren't often left the leeway for long speeches. When they are, as was apparent sometimes in some of my other plays, the tendency is for people to run on way past the stop point and to reveal things which they didn't set out to reveal. Here's the example of a long speech which actually in the end tells us more about the character than she ever wished us to know about.
When we were first married, it was all so wonderful. David and I. We had this incredible rapport between us. It was really remarkable. Everyone said so. Extraordinary. I'm sure it does happen with every couple to a certain degree, but with us it was... It's the way we both zero in on something, often quite silly, like... Well, on the way back from our honeymoon, for instance, we got stranded at some God-forsaken place waiting for a flight that had failed to materialize, and we were just sitting in this airport lounge, and it must have been about 4 in the morning, and people were trying to sleep, and the seats were all so hard, and it was just awful, as you can imagine. And conversation had dried up completely, and we were both simply too tired even to read. And there was this absolute silence. And then suddenly, across this huge expanse of tiled floor from nowhere, came this squeaking noise. Ee? 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 You know? And then gradually this rather elderly, very tired aircrew person appears, covered in gold braid all over his sleeves and his cap, and he's pulling behind him this tiny squeaking trolley, bearing all his worldly possessions. And as he passes us, eek, 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 there, in this appalling silence, David turns to me and says very quietly, "Hello, this is your captain squeaking." I nearly died laughing. I just laughed and laughed and laughed. Well, it was funny at the time. Oh, God. We were so happy then.
The problem with long speeches often is they needn't be there at all. The biggest single mistake that the oldest writer in the world, for which I'm getting near to qualifying, and the youngest writer in the world tend to make the same mistakes, and that is underestimating the incredible power of the actor, the actor's ability to say so much with so little. The story of Chekhov arriving at rehearsals and hearing an actress struggling through a long speech and just reaching over and crossing out all but the first two words and saying, "I think those will do." And she was able to say all he wanted to say with her eyes and her voice and the words. We tend always to overwrite, and we spend our lives kicking ourselves in first rehearsals and saying, "It doesn't need all that." If you do overwrite, please get it out before they learn it. You make an awful lot of enemies of actors who've just come in pleased to have learnt the long speech to have found it's been cut. Here's a little bit of overwriting.
Donald, when you think about Caroline, is it genuinely her you're thinking of? Or really just yourself? Truthfully and honestly?
Listen, Delia, I've tried. God knows I've tried. You can't know how much I've given of my life to make that woman happy. The hours, the endless hours of simply attempting to anticipate her needs. Sometimes I haven't slept for nights on end. Can you believe that? Lying awake, planning some birthday or a Christmas treat or some anniversary jaunt or other, some little surprise, I don't know. I'm not boasting, Delia. I don't mean to boast, but no one could have done more than I did. She had everything. I gave her everything. Everything she asked for, and more. Can't you believe that? You seem to be standing there accusing me of failing to understand her. Well, if that's true, all I can say is, I tried. Is it fair to be punished for trying? Believe me, please. You have to.
Do you know, I think I do believe you, Donald.
Example of an actor really making the best out of the same sentence written 500 different ways. Very skillfully done, too. Here's a much more user-friendly writer giving them the same scene with just enough.
Donald, when you think about Caroline, is it genuinely her you're thinking of? Or is it really just yourself? Truthfully and honestly?
Delia, I've tried. Believe me, please. You have to.
Do you know, I think I do believe you, Donald. I really do.
And we're all in the bar 10 minutes earlier. It's wonderful. Little example there in that second one, of course, that the unspoken comes into play, the gap between the words. An example of that, how silence can work. Silence on itself, of course, is meaningless in theatre. It usually means someone's forgotten their lines, or worse still, forgotten to come on. But it can say an awful lot. It depends what, of course, surrounds it. Here's a straight scene first. I think slightly overstated, but not too much, I hope.
It's not true.
It is.
I don't believe you.
Suit yourself?
You're lying. Caroline has never been unfaithful to me. She may have left me now, but she's never been unfaithful in the past. I can promise you that.
Oh, yes, she has.
I would have known.
Not if she didn't want you to. You wouldn't.
I would have known, don't you worry.
What do you want me to do? List them all for you? Every man she's had? Who's had her?
I don't believe it. She would never have done that.
I'm her best friend, remember? She's told me everything, didn't she? Every single sordid detail.
I don't believe it. Okay, the same scene now, taken with one side just removed and the silence speaking for us, much more dramatic, I think, and more interesting.
It's not true. I don't believe you. You're lying. Caroline would never have been unfaithful to me. She may have left me now, but she's never been unfaithful in the past. I can promise you that. I would have known. I would have known. Don't you worry. I don't believe it. She would never have done that. I don't believe it.
Yeah, that's better. Trick of the trade. It's what we farceurs call the plant. Also good in dialogue, good for incident, good for anything, is never to waste anything in plays. Occasionally, you can bury things for a long, long time and let them explode in due course. Here's an example of the plant.
Can I tell you a secret? Something I've never told anyone.
What?
It's silly. It's ridiculous, really.
Go on.
You won't tell everyone, will you?
No, of course not.
You promise?
Promise.
Well, whenever I feel, you know, aroused, you know.
Aroused? How do you mean?
You know, aroused.
Do you mean sexually aroused?
Yes. Yes, but whenever I do, I feel, I feel...
What? Well, what do you feel?
I feel this irresistible urge to sneeze.
Sneeze?
Yes.
How extraordinary.
Do you think that might put people off me? Women?
Well, I shouldn't think so, not really. So long as you carry a handkerchief.
Perhaps another device, one could call it, a very interesting trick to use, is the offstage character. All dramatists use them. Some use them better than others. They have a perspective effect. They create a world beyond your world, if they're used well, and gives you a feeling that, that things are going on outside. Some of my best characters have been off stage. I seem to recall people actually vividly remember them better than the ones on stage, just probably saying something. But you can overdo it. Do remember that people have only so much memory power. Here's a case of far too many offstage characters.
I mean, the point is, Donald, that David and I are different from, say, you and Caroline, or James and Betty, or Rita and Frank, for that matter. I mean, I was talking to Lucy only the other day, and she told me that Janet and Tony, when they have a row, they barely speak to each other for days on end, whereas Teddy and Myrtle always sit down and try to thrash things out. We're all of us different.
Which has people rustling through their programs trying to find out. Look of disappointment as Teddy and Myrtle don't even appear is too much. Here I hope is a justifiable offstage character used for dramatic import.
Do you know who you reminded me of just then? John Carter.
Really?
Terribly like him.
John Carter?
Yes.
Who the hell's John Carter?
Oh, long before your time.
You've never mentioned him before.
No? Well,
And I remind you of him.
sort of. Sometimes. When you get like that.
Like what?
Like you got just now. John used to get like that.
John Carter did.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Well, what happened to him? This, John Carter. Where is he now? Do you still see him?
John? Oh, heavens no. I walked out after 3 weeks. He drove me up the wall in the end.
Sure. Also says something about her present relationship. Another thing to bear in mind when you're writing dialogue is that around about the technical rehearsal, sometimes a late run-through, the director is going to shout, speed it up, faster, faster, faster. It's a sort of neurosis that sets in as they realize it's running 4 hours 50. Actors can only do so much if they're to be honest actors who try to behave like their characters would behave. And one of the things you don't serve them very well is if they can't speed up because the dialogue won't allow them to. It's what I call slow cueing. In this particular section, everything they respond to is at the very end of the previous speech by the other character, so they are forced to wait.
You've never considered me for a second. You've gone your own sweet, selfish way. You've always had everything you've wanted. I've never met a person who was more spoilt and self-willed.
Self-willed? I like that. You're a fine one to talk about self-willed. I can't believe what I'm hearing. This mark you from the man who's treated our marriage like a doorstop.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about, a doorstop?
You know perfectly well what I mean. That's typical of you, picking me up on piddling little details, changing the subject.
Who's changing the subject? Oh, that's just incredible. That's tremendous coming from someone with a mind like a demented grasshopper.
How dare you call me a grasshopper, you pompous pickle.
Very even, nothing much you can do with it. You tell them to speed him up to Kingdom Come, they won't get much faster than that. But a little bit of readjustment of the sentences, putting the key word in a little bit earlier, allows the actor genuinely to react and come in with a little bit more speed. They can naturally get their thought process together for the next speech. So I've just shifted a few words around here, and you'll see how the key words are now arriving earlier in the previous sentence, like so.
You've never considered me for a second. You've gone your own sweet, selfish way. I've never met a person who was more spoiled and self-willed. You've always had everything you've wanted.
Self-willed? I like that. You're a fine one to talk about self-willed. This mark you from the man who's treated our marriage like a doorstop. Can't believe what I'm hearing.
What are you talking about, a doorstop? What are you talking about?
You know perfectly well what I mean. That's typical of you. Changing the subject, picking me up on piddling little details.
Who's changing the subject? Oh, that's tremendous, coming from someone with a mind like a demented grasshopper. That's just incredible.
How dare you call me a grasshopper, you pompous pickle.
Faster and better. You can go a little faster than that, if you like, by employing the old trick of overlap. Overlap has a great achievement, as long as there's nothing very vital being said and it gets lost, of giving the scene, the play, a certain rev. It's like going through a rather fast banking on a racetrack. It just gives you that extra kick. It's a sort of actor's Beecher's Brook, this one. Mike and Lee are going for the big one with overlap on that same scene. Good luck.
You've never considered me for a second. You've gone your own sweet, selfish way. I've never met a person who was more spoiled and self-willed. You've always had everything that you've wanted.
You're a fine one to talk about self-willed. This mark you from the man who's treated our marriage like a doorstop.
What are you talking about, a doorstop? What are you talking about?
Well, what I mean. That's typical of you, changing the subject.
Who's changing the subject?
Oh,
that's tremendous, coming from someone with a mind like a demented grasshopper.
Oh, how dare you call me a grasshopper,
that's just incredible.
You pompous pickle.
Better still. Ending it. Various ways to end plays. They're always difficult. If you end them so that it's all rounded off, people are for a moment happy and then immediately dissatisfied. If you leave it in the air, people write in suggesting a better ending. It's all very frustrating. You can have the what I call the oh so happy ending, which runs like this.
Oh, yes. Yes, Donald. 1,000 times, yes. But I think I ought to warn you. Twins run in my family.
No. There's the sudden abrupt ending. We could try.
I just wanted to tell you.
Don't say another word, damn it. Just kiss me, woman.
The unresolved ending favoured by certain dramatists.
I just wanted to, I needed to tell you, I just wanted.
Cut. What was all that about? Or we go back to our rainbow-filled friends and you finish it on what we call the wistful stroke whimsical.
You know something?
What?
My only regret.
What's that?
We never did take that trip to the moon, did we?
I once coined the phrase, which was probably not original, certainly wasn't, that comedy was tragedy interrupted, and that equally tragedy was comedy interrupted. Here's the comic ending.
Donald, I've been thinking it over. I've treated you very badly. I've behaved just appallingly. I don't quite know how to say sorry. The point is, are you willing to start again? Us, I mean, you and me. I'm prepared to make a try, if you are. Are you? Please? Please say yes.
And the tragic?
No.
There's one I sort of prefer, which is called The Inevitable. It's approached by both protagonists, well, at least one of them rather reluctantly, but nonetheless we know where it's heading, rather like this.
Any chance of seeing you again? I mean, I know I've behaved like a complete...
Idiot.
Idiot, yes, that as well. But all the same, I really do believe I'm in love with you, Delia. It's ridiculous, I know.
Is it? It's not ridiculous.
No?
I think I'm probably in love with you too, come to that, Donald.
You are?
Yes.
But that's wonderful.
I mean, I can't really say I like you, Donald. Not at all.
Oh.
But I do think I love you, you see.
Ah.
Does that make any sense at all?
Not really, no.
I mean, in lots and lots of ways, you're really quite appalling. So why the hell do I love you, Donald?
I've no idea.
Why the hell do you love me? If you really do, that is.
I do.
Why? Why on earth?
I think you're just perfect.
You do?
Utterly perfect. You're the most perfect creature in the world.
And then on top of everything else, you're stupid, aren't you?
You can call me all the names you like. I love you.
Yes, and I've said, I love you.
Well then, what are we waiting for?
It'll never work, you know.
It might. You never know. Stranger things have happened. Listen, since you love me, do you think it would be all right if I went ahead and kissed you?
If you really want to.
Right. Here goes then.
Dear God, whatever have we started?
the sort of inevitable British ending, really. Here's one called, for those of you with long memories, The Payoff.
Do you really love me, Donald? Truthfully, do you? Do you want us to sleep together? I'd like that, would you?
Finally, and simplest is probably the best in a way, the simple.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Leo, Mike, thank you very much. Thank you.
What a charming program. And look out for Ayckbourn's plays in Australia. They're often performed here. Next week, a program about acting with a very special touch. It's a Dutch theatre group rehearsing and performing Shakespeare. What's unusual is that the 15 young actors have Down syndrome. It's a glorious program that makes you feel great, and it's a good way to celebrate the United Nations Year of Tolerance. Hope you'll join us then for Masterpiece, 8:30 on Monday night. Good night.